Hey explorers, today I'm heading to one of the strangest places in California. A city planned for tens of thousands of people, but today, most of the streets are still empty. And when you see it from the sky, it gets even stranger. Developers planned more than 25,000 home sites here, and they even paved hundreds of miles of roads before the homes were even built. Golf courses, marinas, shopping centers, entire neighborhoods. Because the city was built on something developers thought would last forever. But they were wrong. And the reason why changed the fate of this entire place. I can't wait to tell you all about it, so let's go check it out. Today, we're going to be exploring a fascinating city in California's Imperial Valley. Now, if you've ever taken a look at a satellite map of the Salton Sea, one thing instantly stands out. On the western shoreline, there's an entire grid of streets carved into the desert. It looks like a city, but when you zoom in, there's nothing there. And that's because Salton City was originally planned as a huge resort community with tens of thousands of homes. A full-scale waterfront city in the middle of the desert. But today, much of it still hasn't been built. And the question is, how did this happen? To understand that, we're actually going to have to go back to the beginning of the Salton Sea itself. Most of the Imperial Valley was once covered by a massive prehistoric lake known as Lake Cahuilla. At its largest, it spanned roughly 2,200 square miles, stretching from near modern-day Palm Springs south toward the Colorado River Delta in Mexico, making it one of the largest lakes California has ever seen. Lake Cahuilla dried up in the early 1600s after the Colorado River changed course, leaving the Imperial Valley dry for about 3 centuries, until something unexpected happened in 1905. As settlers began farming the Imperial Valley around the turn of the 20th century, engineers attempted to divert Colorado River water through a system of canals. One of the engineers behind the project was Charles Robinson Rockwood, who helped design the irrigation system. By 1901, water from the Colorado River was flowing into the valley through the Alamo Canal. This worked, at least for a while. But there was a major problem. To deal with heavy silt buildup, engineers cut a temporary diversion in the river without installing proper headgates to control the flow. In 1901, there were no major dams on the Colorado River. No Hoover Dam, no Glen Canyon Dam, no Parker Dam. The Colorado was still a wild, unpredictable river. And then in 1905, the Colorado River reminded everyone exactly why engineers had feared it for decades. After a particularly wet season in 1905, the Colorado River surged and broke through the diversion works that had been built to feed the canals. Suddenly, the river began pouring unchecked into the Imperial Valley, flooding the basin. The river flowed into the basin for about 18 months before engineers were finally able to stop it. And what was left behind was the Salton Sea, essentially a smaller, modern version of ancient Lake Cahuilla. If engineers hadn't eventually stopped the flow, the ancient Lake Cahuilla could have begun to return. I'm just now arriving on what would have been the main drag of Salton City on Highway 86. Now, if the city ever actually were completed, most of this section would have been lined with storefronts and traffic lights. But instead, we just have these uncontrolled intersections where you have to cross over the oncoming side of the highway just to get into the city. For several decades after the 1905 flood, the Salton Sea sat mostly unnoticed. Few people thought it would last long enough to justify a major development. Nobody really considered building anything here because, well, it wasn't considered a lake, more like a giant accidental puddle. Everyone thought it would just dry up and disappear. But by the 1950s, something changed. The puddle was still here. California was booming and the population was exploding. Suddenly, this giant accidental desert lake started looking like a major opportunity.
This is only a part of the story of Salton City. Salton City is also a story of the greatest of all investments in the future. No undertow, no perilous sea life, with waiting area as far as a quarter of a mile out. Children play in safety, way as only children can play. And here's another investment in the future. Here is health. Water means fun, and Salton Sea water is ideal for the amateur skier, superb for the skillful. And when you ski on the fastest water on Earth, It's a thrill for even a ski champion.
Southern California experienced a massive, rapid population growth between 1940 and 1960, driven primarily by wartime industry and post-war suburbanization. Los Angeles County alone more than doubled from 2.78 million in 1940 to over 6 million by 1960. The 1950s saw a huge boom in boating and leisure. Speedboats, water skiing, trailer culture, and weekend recreation. The Salton Sea still hadn't dried up, and suddenly it looked like an inland ocean within driving distance of LA and San Diego. At its peak in the 1950s and early 1960s, the Salton Sea was attracting millions of visitors each year, rivaling some of California's major tourist destinations. In 1958, one company unveiled an ambitious plan. They called it Salton City.
How did Salton City begin? Man saw, and he liked what he saw, so he dreamed and planned, and then decided once again to invest in the future. He brought his skills and machinery into the desert, came in by air, so things could be done that much faster.
The vision was enormous. A master-planned community designed for around 40,000 residents, covering thousands of acres along the western shore of the sea. More than 25,000 residential lots, along with golf courses, marinas, shopping centers, and schools. Developers ran advertisements in Los Angeles newspapers offering free bus tours to bring potential buyers out to the desert. They eventually paved more than 250 miles of roads, infrastructure for a city that was only partially built. The dream was simple, an affordable waterfront city just a few hours from Los Angeles and San Diego. And on paper, it worked.
Man surveyed, laid out the streets and the lots for the future, came the heavy equipment, and man dug into the earth. He brought in water and drenched the level roads to give them solidity before paving.
Driving through Salton City today, you can still see the scale of what they were trying to build. Street after street after street. You know, something interesting about Salton City is the way the streets were built. Instead of using a simple grid, developers chose to use curving suburban-style streets and cul-de-sacs, something you would typically see in a post-war housing development. The idea was to create quiet residential neighborhoods, but today, most of those neighborhoods were never built. And the reason why comes back to something developers either misunderstood or purposely ignored. The Salton Sea has no outlet. Every drop of water that flows in stays. But when water evaporates, the salt stays behind. Over time, salinity levels began to rise. Fish populations collapsed. Massive fish die-offs lined the shoreline, and the smell drove tourists away. For much of the 20th century, the Salton Sea was sustained mostly by irrigation drainage from Imperial Valley farmers. Beginning in the 1970s, farmers and irrigation districts began improving water efficiency, implementing more efficient irrigation systems that used less water, and incorporating drainage systems that captured runoff before it reached the sea. Over time, the shoreline began to retreat in some areas, and the waterfront that developers had promised slowly started to disappear.
Here, the miracle of man. This is the future coming to life before your eyes. Here is the great marina, designed and constructed to give enjoyment to thousands for generations to come. Built by man for the enjoyment of man. This is the future today.
Salton City was never fully abandoned. Today, only about 5,000 people live in Salton City, a fraction of what developers once envisioned. What remains is a strange landscape, infrastructure built for a population that never arrived, a suburban grid stretching miles into the desert, waiting for a future that never quite materialized.
Out of the labor and mind of man, out of the barren desert, out of the many months of endeavor and daring imagination, a city is born, and business sees a future in Salton City and becomes part of the great scheme of things.
Salton City really isn't a ghost town, it's something stranger. A city built on the assumption that the sea would remain exactly the way it was. But the Salton Sea was never natural, it was accidental. And when the environmental reality started to catch up, the dream started to unravel. Out here in the desert, you can still see the outlines of what might have been. A waterfront city, a desert Riviera, a future that looked inevitable until it wasn't. All right, explorers, thanks so much for joining me on this trip out to Salton City. You know, places like this are so fascinating to me because they show how quickly a grand vision can collide with reality. In the late 1950s, developers imagined the entire shoreline of the Salton Sea becoming a thriving desert resort city for tens of thousands of people. But today, much of that vision exists only in the empty streets we explored. And the story isn't completely over. There are ongoing efforts right now to address some of the environmental challenges facing the Salton Sea. Efforts such as habitat restoration and plans to reduce the dust from the exposed lakebed. Whether or not these efforts ultimately revive the region remains to be seen, but it does raise an interesting question. What should happen here next? Should the place be revived, restored, or simply left as a reminder of an ambitious idea that never quite worked out? I'd love to know what you think, so let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed exploring this story with me, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more hidden history and forgotten places like this. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next adventure.